Okay. So, still under the category of anxiety disorders would be specific phobias. I put some common fear objects on the screen, and I apologize to anybody who's scared of any of these things. But um, basically, with a specific phobia, you have uncontrollable, irrational, intense desires to avoid an object or a situation. So these are obviously objects. Situations could be public places, public speaking, things like that. I put irrational in the list, even though for all disorders you have to always remember that, unjustifiable is one of the criteria for the behavior to be a disorder. So, let's say that you got bit by a rattlesnake on a hike and nearly died from it. And now, from evermore, you're scared of snakes. That's not really a phobia. That's called learning from experience, right? So if you suddenly don't really want to go for hikes in areas where there are rattlesnakes anymore, I don't think we should be judging you. We shouldn't be telling you to get over it, right? Instead, we should be maybe finding places where rattlesnakes are less likely to be when we want to go for a hike. It's the irrational part. And then I really wanted to emphasize the uncontrollable, because a lot of times people who have phobias, other people think they're sort of playing it up. Like they're just pretending to be that intensely fearful. They'll start shaking. Their heart rate goes up. They break out in a cold sweat. They have just this really intense fight or flight response, so that they get all these physical symptoms when confronted with their fear object. And it could be a picture, and that's why I apologized for this slide, because sometimes it can be a picture that is adequate to start producing these kinds of physical responses. People who don't have that kind of phobic response to something oftentimes are a little judgmental, a little unforgiving of a person who has a phobia to an object, acting as if the phobic person could control their response. And if you're at the disordered level, you really can't control their response. Interestingly, in the U.S., fear is the emotion that we work the hardest to try and teach our children how to mask. We try and teach our kids to pretend like they're not scared of things that they're scared of. And so probably being unsympathetic to people's phobic responses is a manifestation of our general cultural desire for people not to act like they're scared of things. Now here are some common fears and phobias. Okay, so the blue column is the percentage of people who report that they're scared of the item, and the green column is people who report that they're at the phobic level. One of the things you'll notice is overall, phobias are pretty rare as we look at each of these individual examples. A lot of people are scared of these things, though. Being alone is the least fearful thing for people. Animals, heights, these things seem to be really a lot more common. But we're still looking at 20 to 24% of the population who report being scared of some kind of animal, or being scared of being at a height or something like that. There are other phobias that aren't on this list that are things that you've heard of, like agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is a fear of being out in a public place, and particularly when people with this kind of phobia have really been pressed, it seems like they're worried that they're going to have some kind of panic attack, or maybe if they have some kind of physical ailment, they're worried that it's going to come to the forefront while they're out in this public place and there won't be anyone to help them, and that they'll be truly alone and, scared and maybe hurt or whatever. So agoraphobia is sort of a fear of going out into a public setting in an effort to avoid having this, unpleasant adventure where you have a panic attack or something. Social phobia is specifically a fear of social settings where you're afraid that other people are watching you or that they're judging you in a social setting. So you don't want to go into the social setting. Social phobia is being more frequently diagnosed these days, and a lot of people are pointing to the fact that we can maintain social contact with others without having to go out into settings where people who we don't know might be looking at us and watching us and judging us. And so we sort of hide in our houses and communicate only with those people who we want to share our energy with via the internet or our texting or something like that. And so we're worried that people are sort of narrowing their world. They won't go out in public and things like that. There's actually a name for it in Japan. It's called hikikomura. I can't say things correctly in Japanese, so I apologize if you speak Japanese. But it's a disorder that has become much more common in the past 20 years among particularly emerging adults. People who are between 18 and 25 are the most likely to get diagnosed with this kind of social phobia, and they really don't ever want to leave their house. They don't want to. They'll have all their stuff delivered, and then they'll like tell the delivery person just leave it on the doorstep. And then once the delivery person walks away, then they'll open the door and pull their stuff in. They just don't want to have any social face-to-face contact, and so it's a special kind of social phobia. But it's interesting how both of the other phobias that I listed are really about being around other people, right? Being in a public place and something will happen, or being around other people. So yeah, it's kind of interesting what we fear. Now, some of the things on the general list: being alone, storms, water, closed places. I'm going to put flying into sort of the same category as height. And then blood and animals. These are things that across the history of humanity that have been scary for us. And so it's probably beneficial that we have the good sense to be scared of these things. Now, should we be phobic of them? Probably not. We shouldn't have to be shaking and crying and things when there's a thunderstorm. But knowing to be scared of it and get inside the house or something, that probably has historically made good sense, right? Okay. This disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, has become a really common catch-all among the layperson to describe anybody who seems to be really fixated on order and ritual and stuff like that. When I was a kid, we used to call people anal retentive. We'd say they have an anal personality if they were really into orderliness and stuff like that. Today, you hear people refer to each other as OCD. And so obsessive compulsive disorder, you have obsessions, which are intense, unwanted worries, ideas, images that pop into your head unbidden. You didn't volunteer to be thinking about these things. They just popped into your head, and you can't get them to go away. You cannot get these thoughts to go away. So sort of like this woman who's got all these books on OCD. She's like obsessed with OCD. Irony. Then there are the physical side, which can manifest in compulsions. Compulsions are behaviors that must be performed. And she looks pretty tired. She looks like she has to keep reading about OCD, doesn't she? These are behaviors that you feel like you absolutely have got to do. And there's a certain amount of like magical thinking that goes along with compulsions. I have my obsession that I can't get out of my head, but if I do this behavior, it will relieve that obsession for a little bit of time. And so I feel like sort of I have to do it. It's like this magical ritual that I have to do so that it takes my mind off of the thing that I'm anxious about. So what are people mostly obsessed with and compulsively doing? Common obsessions are, number one, concern with dirt, germs, or toxins. Then there's something terrible happening, and that lumps together with things like fire in the house, death, illness. Those all kind of get lumped together into something terrible. And then the least common obsession is obsession with symmetry, order, or exactness. So when a person says, "Oh, you're so OCD about that," because you're saying, "No, we need to be really, exact in our phrasing when we write this group paper or whatever." That's a fairly uncommon kind of OCD, to be really obsessed with exactness. Much more likely that you're worried that you're carrying dirt on your hands that could cause somebody to get sick. And so then you'll notice a lot of these compulsions are tied to the obsessions, right? So if you're obsessed with dirt, germs, and toxins, a great way to sort of relieve that obsession is to compulsively wash your hands or compulsively groom. There are some people who compulsively groom by running their fingers through their hair and finding any that are loose, and then they'll escalate and they'll start pulling ones that feel like they were about to come out and be loose. And then next thing you know, they'll start pulling completely healthy hairs out, and they'll get patches of baldness, things like that. I had a Girl Scout who pulled all of her eyebrow hairs out and pulled all of her eyelash hairs out. And she couldn't help it. She didn't want to do it, but she would just absentmindedly, she compulsively had to do it. I mean, she just could not do it. So compulsions are behaviors that oftentimes help to relieve the anxiety that's generated by the obsessions. A really common pattern in OCD is people who recheck things. And this is a really good time to point out that all of us have probably had a little experience with sort of an OCD kind of like routine. If you've ever been home alone and you're just about to go to sleep and then had that thought, did I lock the door? That's an obsession. When you think, did I lock the door? And then your brain can't stop thinking, did I lock it? I think I did, but what if I flipped it the wrong direction? You know what? You're not going to sleep until you get up and go check that lock. That, for people who don't have OCD, will drop the anxiety. The act of getting up and checking the lock will drop the anxiety so that you can go to sleep. A person with OCD will get up, check the lock, get back in bed and say, oh geez, did I just lock it or unlock it? And then get up and go check it again. And they'll get back in bed. And then they'll say, was that last night that I checked it or tonight? And they'll go check it again. And then they'll say, maybe I left the key in the outside of the door, I better check it. Right? They'll keep coming up with reasons that would make it make sense that they should get up and check it again. And next thing you know, they could spend hours or maybe even the entire night checking and rechecking the lock. And they can't get to sleep, and it starts to interfere with the way that they live their life. It can become maladaptive. Look at these compulsions. Excessive hand washing. It's great to wash your hands and get the germs off. It is not good to wash your hands to the point that you've gotten the skin off. So you can take these compulsions that could be beneficial if done, in moderation, and then it turns into something that you can't stop doing, and it can actually become something that's maladaptive and harmful. Okay, let's go ahead and take a little break, and we'll come back and talk about my last example of anxiety disorder, which is PTSD.